What is up, everybody? I hope you had a fantastic day, fantastic weekend. Football season is over. And what a anticlimactic way to end the season. I don't know. It was cool, I guess, watching the Chiefs lose, but then you're stuck rooting for the Eagles. Either way, though, I wasn't rooting for either team. I really didn't care who won. But if I had a preference, it was definitely the Eagles winning, just because I feel like there had to be a precedent set that the Chiefs can be beat. If the Chiefs had three-peated and for the second year in a row beaten a team that was clearly superior to them, I think it would have been a disaster. It would have been really hard to gain the confidence for the rest of the NFL that these guys can be beat. And now we've seen it. Now the blueprint is there. It wasn't just okay, the time the Chiefs lost in the Super Bowl was the time that they faced Tom Brady. We got to shatter that narrative, and that's fantastic. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some of the areas where the 49ers have had missteps that have stopped them from getting potential Super Bowls. We're going to talk about shattering some of those narratives that were out there before this Super Bowl. And then, of course, we're going to get into the Debo Samuel news. But first, we're going to hit this intro. All right. Welcome back to Last Second Sports, where we are giving you our take down to the last second. How do you guys like the camera setup and the lighting? I'll tell you what, that is like the one thing, not the one thing. There's a lot of things when you get into YouTube and all these podcasts, whatever, that you just kind of gotta learn. Lighting is a mother trucker. Let me tell you, I have struggled with my lighting since I feel like day one. And every time I feel like I get it dialed in, something happens to a camera setting, screws it all up. But hopefully, I'm a lot brighter than what I normally am. I know like, it's pretty dark around me normally, and I don't get it because I've got like lights here and lights there and over here. And I just couldn't get it dialed in, but I think I finally got it figured out. At least on my end, it looks really good. Uh, I mean, listen, I'm not asking you to judge what I personally look like. I don't need to hear that from you. I'm just saying the ambiance. You know what I mean? The ambiance. How does it look? Is the lighting good? Does my skin look soft and supple? Is that supple is kind of a sketch word. Is what's more sketch, supple or moist? You guys let me know. I'm curious to see. Dave already with a super chat says, love to see you, Jess. Watched you on Ryan's channel. Appreciate that. That was a fun little interview to do. Definitely different than talking sports and just shows kind of who I am, how I grew up, and what makes me tick, I guess. Thank you. I appreciate it. Too dark still, even, huh? You think so? I'll have to go back and watch it. The only way to really tell is by watching it, but I don't know. It's definitely brighter than what I've been. That I know for a fact. Appreciate the feedback though. Dave says, "Crazy how similar lives are led by like-minded people." Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So I had a friend. I've been friends with this guy. His name's Eric forever. We became friends through basketball. He ran basketball camps, dribbling camps, ball handling camps, and I had a mutual friend through him, and we ended up becoming friends and competing in basketball tournaments together for many, many years. And we talked last week, and he said, "Hey, you should take this personality test." So I just took it. I've been geeking out on it. So he sent it over to me, and I took it. And I'm looking up the personality. It's like a bunch of different letters it gives you. I'm looking up the personality, and it's the third most rare personality. There's 16 different ones, and the one that I got was the third most rare. And it was exactly who I am. It's exactly how I act. It's exactly who I am. And it also, I think it gave me some feedback to why I might be perceived the way that I am to the 49ers community. I took a lot of that out of it. And just the way that I think analytically, there's not a lot of room for gray area. I don't really care about emotions when it comes to decision making. And I think that shows in the way that I talk about players and this team. And so it comes across very, very negative to a lot of people, which is totally understandable. But I didn't really understand that that was a personality trait. So it's not necessarily one that's negative or positive. It's all in how you perceive it. But I think a lot of people perceive my analytical mind and the way that I talk about things, and then also seemingly don't really care about the backlash as I'm a jerk or I'm trying to be this way, or it's like, no, this is just who I am and it's not intentional by any means. And I do genuinely care. I just don't show it that way. I think honestly, Kyle Shanahan we might have the same personality trait because I don't know if you heard the story where Kyle Shanahan, I'm way off track right now, by the way. Anyways, who cares? Uh, but Kyle Shanahan, the story about when he was looking for houses with his wife, and he kept talking about all the things that were wrong with this house, and she just broke down crying, and he's like, "What's wrong?" She's like, "I really love this house, and you don't like it. We're not going to get it." And he said, "What are you talking about? I love this house. I want to put in an offer." The way that he talked about it was all the things that were. That's the way that I am. I'm the exact same way. I don't. I can't help it. It's just who I am, I guess. Anyways, you should take a personality test. It'll give you some insight into who you might be. The BS report says, does Philly winning change your mind at all on non-elite quarterbacks being paid elite money winning a Super Bowl, or no, because Hurts isn't making big money? No, because Hurts isn't making big money yet. It all comes down to when that contract happens. Where are they at within the contract? And I've said multiple times that Brock Purdy early on in his contract is also going to have the same opportunity. It's not as if day one Brock Purdy signs a contract and then all of a sudden the 49ers can't win, because they can still, team building is year to year, and the money available to you year to year, the salary cap going up, what have you. The way they've structured his contract is very beautiful. And I hope the 49ers can do something similar with Brock Purdy, because it'll keep them competitive for a while, or it should. Dave Barclay says, "You look great. You're a sexy beast." From a straight guy, of course. Yeah, I got you. Keith Murphy says, "Super Bowl takeaway: trenches, trenches, trenches." Yeah, I think that's should have been a takeaway well before the Super Bowl for sure. It definitely should have been. And the 49ers, I feel like once upon a time also had that takeaway, but as of late, not so much. Gaza says the Eagles win shows we're not going to be back in the Super Bowl next year. Going to take a couple of years at least to build the offensive and defensive line. Yeah, I definitely think that that is a takeaway that you can have. I mean, building the trenches, if that's the route the 49ers are going to go, is not going to be a one-off season process. It's just not going to be a one-off season process. So it will take some time. It will take some time. But if that's your true north, if your true north is we want to build the trenches, then I like it. And it may take a couple years, and that's okay. Because if you feel like you have a franchise quarterback, you're building around him anyway. So just keep doing that. I'd rather figure it out now than later, for sure. All right. Here's a sobering thing that came across my thought process last night as I was watching this game. Is the 49ers have either missed out or passed on these things happening since 2017. So in Mahomes, or excuse me, in 2017, we know that Mahomes famously, they passed on him. They didn't even really scout him that much. They didn't go to his pro day, anything like that, because they had a plan of getting Kirk Cousins. We know the story. And we know that Mahomes has gone on to be a great player. Now, whether he would have done that for the 49ers or not, who knows? But that's like the famous one. Then in 2020, we all remember Tom Brady as well. 49ers had a chance to get Tom Brady after the 2019 Super Bowl. At that time, he was leaving the Patriots, looking for his new team, would have loved to have been a 49er. And Kyle Shanahan and team said no. They felt like Jimmy Garoppolo was starting to ascend as a player, was coming off of a major injury. They got to a Super Bowl with him. They felt like they could continue to win with Jimmy Garoppolo, who was younger. They felt like he probably wasn't quite in his prime and he would just get better. And unfortunately, that did not happen. Here's what I will say, that thought process at that time probably wasn't that far off, wasn't that crazy. I personally was out on Jimmy G. I think it was the second Seattle game. No, not the second one. The first Seattle game that year. I just saw something that I was not a fan of. It might have been the second one. I don't remember. Either way, I was out in one of those Seattle games with Jimmy Garoppolo. There were some things that I saw, and for me, I was out. But a lot of people were in, and I understand why they would be. And if he had won a Super Bowl, I would have looked crazy at that time. I would have. And Tom Brady, a lot of people felt like he was washed. Now, I was not in that camp because when you watched him play and you realized the lack of weapons around him, and you saw that the arm strength was still there, the decision making was still there. I think that was the year the Patriots lost to the Titans in the first round, but he was throwing to nobody, literally nobody. Those guys could not separate. There just wasn't a lot he could do, but Tom Brady could clearly play. However, even knowing those things, Jimmy Garoppolo at the age he was, coming off of a major injury and playing in a Super Bowl, I think it does stand to reason that the thought process of assuming he could get better and would get better is not necessarily that flawed. Obviously, he got injured the next year again. Some other things started to show out, and it became pretty clear that Jimmy Garoppolo was not who they thought he was. But without seeing it play out, I could understand why the 49ers would think the way that they did. Although passing up on Tom Brady is still crazy. I'm just trying to go through their thought process and make sense of it. But so 2017, Mahomes, 2020, Brady. Then in 2021, you have Matthew Stafford, which it's not that they passed up on Stafford, but they didn't jump on the opportunity fast enough. The Detroit Lions traded him to the Rams, and we know what happened there. And then the one that is talked about less, and I think should be talked about more now that last night happened, was Vic Fangio in 2023. Now, a lot of people push back on this one because they say, well, you don't know for sure if he wanted to come in. Listen, there's a lot of little things that happened that make it pretty clear that Vic Fangio wanted to be here. So, if you remember the 2022 season, before the season started, Vic Fangio was hanging around 49ers headquarters an awful lot. He was a consultant helping the 49ers out, but didn't have an official role. He was just around. Then, as the year goes on, he eventually went over to the Eagles, was a consultant for them as they were prepping, oddly enough, for the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl. And they lost. But then Vic Fangio wanted to get back into the coaching game. So the Miami Dolphins offer Vic Fangio. He kind of, at least not, he didn't publicly accept, but it had been reported that he had accepted the job. But there was like a 4 or 5 day time span where no announcement was officially made. So we're wondering what's going on. Well, it turns out he then interviews after he had supposedly accepted the Miami job, interviews with the 49ers because that was his preference. The 49ers didn't end up hiring him. Quickly, he made the decision and did go with Miami. So it's almost as if he told Miami, hey, I will come there and coach only if the 49ers don't accept me. But this thing's on hold. So the 49ers didn't take him. He then goes to Miami. Miami moves on from him after a year. By the way, tons of injuries on defense. And it comes out later that Miami players didn't like Vic Fangio because he coached too hard. So talk about a soft organization. The Miami Dolphins are exactly that. And then a year later, Vic Fangio's with the Eagles, and they're winning a Super Bowl. So all of these moves, the Mahomes in 2017, Brady 2020, Stafford 2021, Vic Fangio 2023, all 4 of them now have won at least one ring since the 49ers either got outbid for Stafford or in the other 3 cases decided not to go that route. That sucks. That absolutely sucks. And as it's playing out, when you look back on it, you can see why the 49ers might have not gone in certain directions. You can understand that there could be a thought process there. Yes, it is hindsight and say, well, and it's easy to say now. I think in some of those situations, there were people. I know I was one of them in the Fangio situation and the Brady situation. I definitely was not one of them in the Mahomes situation or the Stafford one, to be clear. But I remember like Vish was big in the Stafford one. Croc was big on the Mahomes one. So there was always somebody in the community advocating for all of these moves to happen at one point or another. And then you as fans I know when these things are happening, you have opinions. So I'm sure that at least one of these, if not multiple of these scenarios, you were saying, hey, you should probably do this, 49ers. So it's not necessarily hindsight's 2020. It's the 49ers just happen to find a reason in all 4 of these scenarios to not make it happen. And in all 4 scenarios, those players or coaches have won rings and the 49ers haven't. That sucks. That sucks. You can call it bad luck. You can go, I don't know, but them's the breaks. We do know that those things happen. Dave says, we all know Lyle is trash. Don't need to convince us. I'm not trying to convince you Lyle's trash or Kyle is trash. I actually have said not to fire him. So a little off on that one. Yeah, not great. Not great. But, the first 2 years, rebuild years, what have you. Okay, let's talk about some of the narratives that existed going into this game last night. Okay. Narrative number 1, oddly enough, is you can't move on from Kyle Shanahan. So these narratives are all ones that I've heard in the community. I'm not going to be naive and say every 49er fan says. These are just narratives that we've all heard. Okay. Narrative number 1 is you can't move on from Kyle Shanahan. What are you going to do? How are you going to get somebody better? Yada, yada, yada. Now, one thing that is not talked about or was not talked about until last night enough and definitely will be talked about here, right here, and then also throughout all conversations is that the Eagles actually won a Super Bowl after moving on from Andy Reid. Everybody talks about the success that Andy Reid had, and deservedly so. He's been incredible. Now he has 3 rings and 5 Super Bowl appearances since leaving the Eagles. But even going into last night, the Eagles had won a Super Bowl after moving on from Andy Reid. So it was actually a win-win for both of them. They both found a way to reach the peak of the mountain. Andy Reid just did it more, including beating the Eagles, by the way, which I get. But after last night, Andy Reid has 3 rings and 5 appearances since being let go from the Eagles. And the Eagles now have 2 rings and 3 appearances. So this was a win-win in both scenarios. And I don't think anybody in their right mind would argue that Kyle Shanahan is a better coach than Andy Reid, especially not now. I mean, now that we've seen him leave Philadelphia and go on to Kansas City and have a lot of success, he's clearly the better coach, right? But even moving on from Andy Reid was beneficial, mutually beneficial for both of them. So that narrative can't be talked about anymore. And again, this is coming from a guy that is advocating that they keep Kyle Shanahan. But the excuse of, well, you can't because no, narrative shattered. That's narrative number 1. Narrative number 2 that is talked about is the 49ers don't have rings because they had to play the Chiefs and the Rams had to play the Bengals. That's the only reason they have a ring. If they had played the Chiefs, they too would have lost. And the only team, the only player to beat the Chiefs in a Super Bowl, Tom Brady. And Tom Brady's not around. Nobody can beat the Chiefs. Well, the Philadelphia Eagles, led by Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni, all of it, they found a way to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. And they found a way building a team similar to the 49ers and one that is not just all on the quarterback, is not quarterback dominant. It is a all-around team that they have built and they have tried to win the Super Bowl with, and they just cashed in. So the narrative of, well, you know, the Rams, they don't deserve any credit because they got to beat the Bengals, and the 49ers had to run up against the Chiefs. Gee golly, what are they going to do? That narrative shattered. Narrative number 3. And this one I've got to own as well because I've been on this side of the narrative, which is Sirianni and Hurts aren't that good. They're just not that good. Sirianni now has coached for 4 seasons. He has 4 playoff appearances. It's funny because now the thought is, well, the Eagles had a down year and they bounced back. And look, they won a Super Bowl. Why not the 49ers? And that is true. Why not the 49ers? We'll see. But in their quote unquote down year, yes, they spiraled, but they still made the playoffs. They were still a playoff team. Now they spiraled at the end of the year and they lost in the playoffs, but they still, at the absolute worst, bottomed out at making the playoffs. And Sirianni was almost fired for that. He had made the playoffs his first year, lost to Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. Jalen Hurts, I think, was a rookie or in his second year, first year starting. Then they went to a Super Bowl, lost in a very highly contested game. Year 3, hit rock bottom by making the playoffs again and losing to Tampa again. I think they lost to Tampa. And Sirianni was almost fired. And I think most people would have backed that up. And then in year 4, he makes it to the Super Bowl again and now has a ring. And by the way, he's done it with 3 completely different sets of coordinators. 3 completely different sets of coordinators. The first year he had, well, I don't know who he had the first year, actually. I assume it was the same. Gannon and Steichen. That's who he had in year 2 when they went to the Super Bowl anyway. I know that. And then last year was, I forget who it was. A bunch of hodgepodge or whatever. Still made the playoffs, by the way. And then this year, gets a whole new set of coordinators, and wins a Super Bowl. So I mean, listen, players are harder to judge off of winning a Super Bowl because there's so many other things that go into it. Trent Dilfer, for example, won a Super Bowl. Nobody looks at him as an all-time great quarterback, and for good reason. Because we saw a whole career of Trent Dilfer, and we know what he was and what he was not. But what else are coaches judged on, if not wins and losses and Super Bowls? Nick Sirianni now has a Super Bowl and has been to the playoffs all 4 years he's been a coach. And he did it with 3 different sets of coordinators. I don't know how we can honestly say he's a bad coach. Now, he's not my cup of tea. I look at it from the outside and go, man, I wouldn't be a big fan of it. But you hear players talk about him. The fact that A.J. Brown, by the way, was one of the 2 players that grabbed the Gatorade and dumped it on him says a lot to me. Because A.J. Brown is a really hard personality to manage. But he was one of the guys that grabbed the Gatorade. I heard Shady McCoy talking about him today, about how much he's loved by that locker room. They really galvanize behind him. They respect him. They need him, basically. I did not know that about him. And from the outside looking in, it's like, man, he's shaving his head on bye weeks and yelling at his own fans against the Browns and mocking the Chiefs. And then in this Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts is holding them back. I'm looking at it saying, Sirianni, this guy, what is up with this guy? I'm good. How can I argue it now? How can anybody argue it now? Now, you can say, I prefer Kyle Shanahan. That is fine. But to just flat out say, with no data point other than your personal thoughts and feelings, that Shanahan is better, based off of what? How do we judge coaches? What is the criteria? So, Sirianni, regardless of what you think about him, he deserves his flowers. And same goes for Jalen Hurts, by the way. I am not a Jalen Hurts fan from the standpoint that I don't think he's elite. I don't like the fact that he can't play on time on a regular basis from the pocket. He makes a lot of his throws outside the numbers and down the field, but over the middle, it gets a little muddy. He doesn't go read to read to read. It's not my style of quarterback that I prefer. I love quarterbacks that are physically gifted like him, can move like him, but they also, if forced to, can just throw the football and go through their reads and win that way if they have to. Not my cup of tea. But man, to act as if Jalen Hurts doesn't deserve his flowers after that run, I'm going to give you Jalen Hurts' stats in 9 playoff games. He has 20 touchdowns and 4 turnovers. 20 total touchdowns and 4 turnovers in 9 playoff games. In the Super Bowl, 2 Super Bowl appearances, he has 7 total touchdowns and 2 turnovers, 75% completion percentage, 667 total yards, an MVP, by the way. And when you look at those 2 seasons he played in the Super Bowl, the season 2 years ago, that was his second best game statistically of the year. And this year, this was arguably his best statistical game of the year. You can argue with like one other game, but I believe statistically this was his best game. So he played at his literal best twice in the game that mattered the most. Twice. I mean, if nothing else, you can't say he's not clutch. He definitely comes up clutch. He plays his best when it's required. So he deserves his flowers too. Again, not my cup. Neither of them are my cup of tea. If I'm building a team or not my guys. But you have to give them credit. You have to. And when I look at the Hurts versus Purdy, by the way, I still prefer Brock Purdy's style of play in a vacuum. I I know this sounds crazy, maybe to some. I think to others they'll get it. I prefer Brock Purdy just because I like that style of play more, and he also does have a little athleticism to him. But it's close. It's not like I'm for, oh my gosh, it's hands down. I'm taking, Brock Purdy in this scenario. That being said, what leg do I have to stand on other than just like the Sirianni and Kyle Shanahan? It's my personal preference because that's the way that I feel. And that's what I like my quarterback to do and play. That's the only thing I have. I statistically, I have no leg to stand on. Accomplishments wise, I have no leg to stand on. Hurts has just played really good when it matters most. There's nothing to argue. And even then, even when he's been bad, he's never actually been bad when it comes to a touchdown to turnover ratio. You add in his, I mean, there was multiple blitzes in that game last night where they perfect blitzes, ones that crushed the 49ers and even crushed the Bills last week that were so well timed that got home against him, and he just boop, right up the middle, rushed for 15, 18, 20 yards, whatever. He deserves credit for that. He does deserve credit for that. So Sirianni and Hurts are not good. That narrative shattered. That narrative got shattered last night. Again, doesn't mean it has to be your preference. They're not my preference. But other than just feelings and how you like it to look, there is no leg to stand on. Those guys have proven they're pretty dang good. They are. Dazza says some of the draft picks have also bitten us. Wirfs over Kinlaw, yes. Solomon Thomas, etc. Yes. Just last night, we saw DeJean getting a pick six against Mahomes, yet we took Pearsall. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think you could do this with every team, though, really. Even when teams, I'll give you an example. I think the Seattle Seahawks made a really, really good pick in Witherspoon. I think he's one of the best corners, if not the most versatile corner in the league. They passed on Jalen Carter. So as good as he is as a player, as good as that pick is, you can say, well, you passed on Carter. And that's true. And Carter is better. So I think we can do this with every, and what I did, by the way, I'm sure we could do that with a lot of teams. We just know what the 49ers have done and the mistakes that they have made. And now when you look back on it and you can say definitively those three quarterbacks and that defensive coordinator, since you told them no, won a ring. I mean, that's pretty tough. That's tough. Dave says, Jesse, read Spidey G's stat. Oh gosh, this was a while ago. I don't know that I'm going to be able to find it now. Let me see. What was the stat? Put it back up there. I'll look for it. I'm going to scroll through Spidey G. Okay. Oh, is this it? Jesse, Mahomes and the Chiefs are 2-0 in the Super Bowl when they play Shanahan. They're 1-2 in the Super Bowl when they don't play Shanahan. I hope the media grills Kyle over this stat. They won't. They won't. I think that I assume that's the stat that we were talking about. There it is. Okay. I appreciate you, Spidey G. Yeah, that is an interesting stat. Yep. That's interesting. Interesting stat. Okay. So those two narratives, those three narratives so far were shattered last night's game. Narrative number 4 that was shattered with last night's game. If the 49ers defense played like the Eagles, the 49ers would have won. No, they wouldn't have. Not necessarily. Because the 49ers defense did play very well last year. Very well. I think we forget how bad the Kansas City Chiefs offense really was for a majority of that game. I'm going to go through real quick. Drive number 1 for the Chiefs. This is against the 49ers, by the way. Punt. Drive number 2 for the Chiefs. Punt. Drive number 3 for the Chiefs. Fumble. Drive number 4 for the Chiefs. Punt. Drive number 5 for the Chiefs. Field goal. End of half. So for the whole first half, they had 3 punts, a fumble, and a field goal. Second half, interception, where the 49ers got the ball in very good field position and did literally nothing with it. Punt. Field goal. Punt. 9 possessions. In 9 possessions, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 punts, 2 field goals, and 2 turnovers. That last punt came with 2 minutes and 42 seconds left in the third quarter. That's what the 49ers defense did to them. And then that punt ended up resulting in the turnover, to which they got the ball and they scored in one play from, I think, 19 yards out. But the 49ers defense did basically exactly what, other than a pick 6, they got a pick, but they didn't return it. Other than that, they did to the Chiefs what the Eagles did basically through 3 quarters. It took them the 10th possession to finally score a touchdown, and that's because they got the ball at the 19-yard line of the 49ers. I'm going to do this one more time. Chiefs possessions against the 49ers in the Super Bowl. Punt, punt, fumble, punt, field goal. 5 possessions in the first half. That's where the first half ends. Second half starts. Interception, punt, field goal, punt. 9 possessions. The defense held them to 5 punts, 2 turnovers, and 2 field goals. The 49ers offense just couldn't score. They couldn't score. And somehow, a lot of people left the Super Bowl last year thinking, oh man, the defense really wet the bed late. No, they didn't. No, they did not. This defense did what they could do. The offense screwed the pooch all the way through. The defense came through in a big way last year. Are you kidding me? 3 points in the first half with 3 punts and a fumble. And then in the second half, you start out with an interception, 2 more punts, and a field goal. What more do you want? What more do you want? If you have an elite quarterback with elite weapons and an elite play caller, what more do you want? The difference was, and I did tweet this out, when the Eagles were up 7-0 and the Chiefs were struggling on offense, I said, the Eagles better put some points up now, because Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs traditionally struggle early in Super Bowls. The problem is teams don't put them away, and then they have room to come back. And if the Eagles had done what the 49ers did and let them hang around so that they could go drop 22 points on their head in the fourth quarter, they too would have lost that Super Bowl. But they didn't. They scored the points. They scored, I think, 17 points outside of the pick 6, and then after the pick 6, another 17 points. The offense did exactly what they needed to do, and that was with Saquon Barkley getting 25 carries for like 50-something yards. I don't know that the 49ers, if they were in that scenario, would have won the Super Bowl. Because we just saw it last year. The 49ers, like the Eagles, were the far superior team. The 49ers, like the Eagles, had a generational running back in his prime, playing out of his mind, getting held to basically nothing in a Super Bowl. A lot of similarities there. The difference is the 49ers didn't cash in, and the Eagles did repeatedly. And early on, they weren't as well. They were not cashing in as well, and it was getting a little dicey. It could have gotten dicey if they had let them hang around. It really could have. Because we saw how fast they can score. Like, they can put up points if they need to. We saw it in 2019. Dave Barclay says, so you're saying the Niners D is as good as the Eagles? Curious. No, what I'm saying is last year's defense, 2023's defense was very good. Very good. Now, Wilkes certainly isn't as good as Fangio. But again, the 49ers could have had Fangio. He could have been the one orchestrating the defense. What I'm saying, though, is that the defense, through the first 9 drives of the game, which bled into almost 3 full quarters of play, did everything other than return their interception that the Eagles did to the Chiefs. They forced multiple turnovers. They forced multiple punts. And they held them down. So they did their job. He says somebody had the stats on the Chiefs' yards pre and post Greenlaw injury, and they didn't start moving the ball until he got hurt. But even then, remember, Greenlaw got hurt before the end of the half. So at this point, we're talking about, I don't remember exactly when. In fact, why guess? We can actually look this up. Let's see. When did Greenlaw get injured in Super Bowl? What minute mark was it? I wonder if we can find that. I know we can, but in a productive manner. Anybody have the timestamp on that, by the way? If anybody has the timestamp, you're goated. Yeah, and then Oren Burks was in the game, and he sure looked pretty good with the Eagles. Okay, we know he left the game. At what minute mark was the stupid? Look, all I know is it was before halftime. I don't know how many drives were left in that first half, but what I do know is they still started the second half with 4 straight drives where they got an interception, forced a punt, Chiefs scored a field goal, and then they forced a punt again. That was without Dre Greenlaw. So they may have moved the ball better, but the defense still was locking them down early on. Really until the special teams blunder. I mean, that's basically it. Saw that one. I wish I knew the minute mark, though. Dazza says, do you think the Eagles win the Super Bowl if Brock was the quarterback? I would like to say yes. I mean, that was a complete blowout. But I can also this is the thing, and we had this conversation a few weeks ago, actually, on the 4-man front. I think we were on Coach's channel, maybe. And my point was, I definitely don't think the 49ers are better with Hurts than they are with Purdy, because Kyle Shanahan would pull his hair out coaching Hurts. But I don't think the Eagles are better with Brock Purdy either than they would be with Hurts. Hurts does a lot for that team, emotionally, physically, everything. Some of those throws he made, deeper throws, I'm not confident that Brock makes those. And when the blitz comes and he runs up the middle multiple times for big gains, I'm not confident that Brock does that either. So, yeah, I mean, I would assume that they would, but I don't know. You can't say that for sure. You can't say that for sure. Just like I also wouldn't, by the way, I also would not say that the 49ers with Jalen Hurts last year would have beat the Chiefs. I wouldn't say that. That's not anything that we know for sure. I just don't think the difference between the two, like in a vacuum, is that big. Even though I prefer Brock over Hurts, and I just know the play style that Hurts is asked to do would not suit Brock Purdy. So I don't know for sure. He says MVP Lamar Jackson only scored 10 points on the Chiefs team last season. The Chiefs defense was more elite last year. Was it though? Was it really more elite? I mean, I don't. I guess. I guess. Um, we also have to consider like weather conditions too. I mean, they were playing in wet, cold weather. I don't know that I don't know that to be true. Dave says, Jesse, you are whoa, pause. Jeez, dude. Jeez. Oh, never mind. I read that wrong. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Daza says, or better question, if you swap Sirianni and Hertz, Kyle Shanahan and Brock today, that I think that is the move that would have to be made. It would have to be both because Sirianni works with Hertz, Kyle Shanahan and Brock work together. I don't think this is the thing though, and this is why Sirianni does deserve credit because I think Sirianni could work with Hertz or Brock. I don't think Kyle Shanahan would work with Hertz. I don't. And that's not an indictment on Brock or Hertz. That is more of an indictment on Kyle Shanahan, I think, than Sirianni. I mean, excuse me, than either of those quarterbacks. But that's a good question. Keith Murphy says, I think the Eagles win yesterday with Pickett. Yeah, I mean, again, I think here's the thing. That's easy to say, but not only was the defense doing their thing, but the offense was putting pressure on the Chiefs. And if Pickett was a quarterback and Saquon Barkley was playing the way that he was, I don't necessarily buy into that. I the pressure of the Eagles continuing to score and move the ball also made Mahomes play a little bit out of character at times yesterday, I believe, because he was forced to try to keep up. Versus the 49ers, he wasn't forced to do anything. It's like, okay, we just keep playing bad. Well, as long as we hang around, we'll have a chance at the end. And we know if Patrick Mahomes has a chance at the end, good luck. They just couldn't hang around yesterday because that offense was putting pressure on them. And Hurts is a big reason as to why the pressure was being applied. So I don't know that. I don't know that to be true. You had Snead on the other side last year, and Snead was really good with the Tennessee Titans. I don't know how good Snead is. Dave Barclay says, "Okay, now I want to know." Also, to be fair, in that Super Bowl, a Minahu, Noddy, and one other player on defense were out. They didn't play. So that defensive line was very depleted against the 49ers going into the Super Bowl. Two starters and one rotational guy was out for the Chiefs on the defensive line going into the Super Bowl versus the 49ers. So those guys were not out yesterday. Dave Barclay says, okay, now I want to know what you thought. Yeah, I'm not going to say that. Deza says, would Brock have made that throw to Smith? And that's what I'm saying. I don't. What the Eagles ask Hurts to do, Brock Purdy, that is not his strength. They ask him to play downfield and outside the numbers and then run the ball a lot. Now, what Brock Purdy is asked to do for the 49ers, which is play on time, accurately, over the middle of the field, I don't believe Jalen Hurts can do either. So it's just two completely different quarterbacks with two completely different styles. And that's why I think it's reckless to just assume, oh, well, if we just take one player and put him here and that it would have, I don't know. I can't say that. I can't say that. And I wouldn't say it the other way. So I think it would be reckless to say it this way as well. Not sure if you've seen the Super Bowl odds. Interesting. Find them very interesting. The Eagles are a plus 650 to win the Super Bowl. The Ravens, man, the Ravens just keep getting respect. The Ravens, low key, are kind of turning into the 49ers from a standpoint that they don't win rings, but they keep getting respected as if they've won rings. It's really actually kind of strange. The Ravens are plus 700. The Chiefs are plus 750. The Bills are also plus 750. The Lions are plus 850. That one's interesting to me because they lost their coordinators. I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't know. It could be a total disaster or they could still be really good. I don't know. The 49ers are plus 1,300. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Six best odds to win a Super Bowl. Now, pretty big gap between them and number 5. Lions are plus 850. The 49ers are plus 1,300. And then there's another big gap. And you have the Bengals, Packers, Commanders at plus 2,000. And then I don't know where the Rams are, but that's interesting to me that the 49ers are that far ahead of the Commanders and the Rams. I do find that interesting. I don't know that I would agree with that, but those are your odds in case anybody's interested. Now let's talk about Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel. So we know that he showed up to the Super Bowl festivities wearing an Eagles uniform. I think Grant had said that he felt like that was him requesting a trade. I didn't subscribe to that or agree to that or agree with that, but it's kind of right. I mean, he had requested the trade well prior. So he felt pretty free to wear that uniform out and about, knowing that he probably was not coming back to the 49ers and is technically not really on a team. And he's certainly not on the team that he's going to end up on, or at least he doesn't believe that. So he felt pretty free in wearing that Eagles jersey. Also, Deebo Samuel looked to be pretty out of shape. And there was a podcast with Tim Kawakami and Matt Barrows, and they talked about how by the end of the season, Deebo Samuel had put on 20 pounds from the beginning of the season. Now, they didn't say his exact weight, but they said that he was 20 pounds overweight and that he had added that weight throughout the course of the season. Now, if you remember, Deebo Samuel came into training camp looking very, very good. Very good. He was in really good shape. Then he did have an injury during the season. And then we kind of started to see as he came back, he got sick. He had the injury that the weight started to get put on again. And this has been a thing since he was a rookie. I mean, when they drafted him, they knew that he had issues with his weight. And as a rookie, Wes Welker used to run with him to keep him in shape. They actually put a weight limit on him of 212 pounds. They didn't want him above 212. He ended up not being able to make that weight and was around 220 as a rookie. And they just let him ride because he was good at that weight. So the 220 was the new weight. But there have always been weight issues with Deebo. It's just what he's always struggled with. But also on that podcast, they talked about Jed and Parag essentially wanted to trade not only Debo but Ayuk last year. So when those rumors were swirling, it was Parag and Jed that were ready to move on, and it was Kyle Shanahan that was basically the reason that they didn't move on from either of those guys. So Kyle Shanahan was able to get his way with both those players. I found that pretty interesting that Jed and Parag wanted to move on, but they just ultimately let Kyle make that decision. So he has a lot of autonomy for sure. And I think you can understand why maybe some of the whispers behind the scenes were that Jed might be growing a little frustrated with giving the 49ers everything. And Kawakami and Barrows also did talk about how this season, because they've put so many assets now back into the coaching staff on top of the rest of the team, this really is kind of a make or break season for this regime, because they didn't say hot seat or fired, or they didn't use those words, but they did say this is an all in urgency season basically for this regime because of all the assets that are poured into that coaching staff. And then if you add that into the fact that last year Jed and Parag wanted to move on from Debo and Ayuk, and Kyle Shanahan is the reason they're here, you can also put two and two together and say, okay, well, they think that about the roster as well. So there is a lot of pressure on this regime to perform. So we'll see how it plays out. But back to the Debo Samuel situation. So I don't use Instagram really. I mean, I have it. I've posted on there a few times, but it's not like my social media preference. But so I didn't know this about Instagram, but I guess you can put up stories to your privated friends. So you can put an Instagram story up that the public sees, and then you can put other ones up that just your closest friends that you say can view can do so. Well, I didn't know this, but I got a DM yesterday on Twitter of a story of Debo Samuel in, and this was his story on Instagram, in a Broncos uniform, and basically said, oh, that looks fresh, that looks sick, whatever. Like he liked the way that it looked. And then I guess on his podcast, he was big up in the Broncos as of late. So no coincidence there. Now, what was on his story to the public is he did post the picture of a tweet saying that he had requested a trade and was granted permission to go talk with other teams. He did put that on his public story for all to see. So it does seem like Debo Samuel's on his way out. It does seem like he prefers the Broncos, interestingly enough, or they prefer him, or there's mutual interest. I don't know. I don't know if that's the team he's going to go to, but I'm curious to see what they do eventually get for Debo. Now, they also talked on that podcast that they believe if the 49ers had been offered a third-round pick for Debo last offseason, that they would have taken it. But they were never offered anything that high. So, I mean, I think a fifth maybe is what they might get offered for Debo if they're lucky. And I think they should take that and run, quite frankly. But I don't know. That's the issue I have with the 49ers is they value their players seemingly at a level that nobody across the league values those players. So the 49ers often are on the wrong side of things when it comes to player evaluation, because the rest of the league clearly does not subscribe to the things that they do. It's the reason that Jimmy Garoppolo came back in the 2022 season, was because they valued him at like 2 second-round picks, and nobody was going to offer that. Nobody. It's the same reason that Debo was brought back last year, because they valued him at a third-round pick, and nobody was going to offer that. And we've heard other stories about when it comes to trades, that they just value their players at a rate that's too high. So I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. Kyle Shanahan clearly loves Debo, and I don't believe that Kyle Shanahan wants to move on from Debo. It's probably a Jed and Parag thing again. And I'm curious to see which side wins out. Because if he gets dealt, then that just means that Jed put his foot down and said, we're done. We wanted to move on last year. You said no. We let you keep him. We're stepping in here. We're done with this. So I'm curious to see what happens, but I gotta imagine that we're gonna know pretty quickly. I mean, he has some bonus things that kick in March. Like they're gonna have to move on from Debo pretty quick, and they can do so really at any point. So I'm curious to see what happens with Debo Samuel. And I don't know that it will linger into the draft. I think something will happen pretty quick. Pretty quick. Caleb says, favorite forgotten 49er. Mine is Shante Spencer or Troy Smith. Wow. That's good. I'll go Kyle Williams. No, I'm just joking. Everybody's forgotten Kyle Williams. LaMichael James. LaMichael James. Huge Oregon Duck fan, so I'll go LaMichael James. That's good though. It's interesting. Dave says Jesse makes Instagram videos on his OF page. Real. For sure, I do. Yep. Daza says Niners need to stop being so sentimental with certain players. Look at the Pats, Rams, etc. Yeah, it definitely does come back to bite you. I mean, the Chiefs, the Eagles. The Eagles are a great example of this. If you're going to win a Super Bowl 2 years after losing it and a year after having a quote unquote down year, then you have to move on from players. I mean, two major staple pieces of the Eagles and Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey retired since they last went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. And on top of that, Hassan Reddick, who was crushing it, they shipped out of town. Completely moved on from him. Brandon Graham was injured. Like they've turned over a lot of this team. Bradbury was a starter. He's gone. They turned over a lot of this team quickly, very quickly, and made some tough decisions. Getting rid of Hassan Reddick when he was playing at that level is pretty crazy. In fact, the player that they brought in from the Jets, did he even play in this playoff run? I don't. I'm going to look at their depth chart. Because they had brought in who was it? Yeah, Bryce Huff. He's not even injured. He's just not playing. See, this is the thing about the Eagles. Okay, so they have Milton Williams, Zach Braun, and Josh Sweat, okay, who are all starters for them and all play big-time roles. You ready for this? I don't know that they're going to let all three of them walk. I would imagine they're going to try to bring back Braun and Sweat. But if they let all three walk, they have behind them, ready to go, Moro Ojamo, who is a pretty dang good prospect, waiting, Jeremiah Trotter, and Jalix Hunt and Bryce Huff. Like, they have players ready to go on deck. And that's without going through another draft cycle and another free agency cycle. You give them another free agency and draft cycle, all three of those players leave, I wouldn't be shocked. And I wouldn't be shocked if they're just as good next year without all three of them. I don't know if you remember, but during the Super Bowl, towards the end, they put up a graphic of the three impactful players from that game on defense. And those were the three players, all three of their free agents. They might let all of them walk. Be like, that's cool. We already got replacements on deck, and we're going to draft those replacements this year in the draft. So we're good. We'll pick up a free agent as well just to make sure that we're good. I could see it happening, and I would trust them to do it. Could you imagine if the 49ers, a graphic got put up and it was like Dre Greenlaw, assuming he's healthy, Dre Greenlaw, Javon Hargrave, and Leonard Floyd. Those three had really big games. And it was like, okay, well, and all three of them are free agents. Be like, what the hell? Two of them are, and we're freaking out over Dre Greenlaw. Absolutely losing our. We can't lose Dre Greenlaw. Oh my god, we got Dre. They got to sign Dre Greenlaw, and hopefully he's healthy. And I'm freaking out over losing Greenlaw, and it's not. I mean, Greenlaw is great. Trust me, I would love to have him back. But the fact that they lost him going into last offseason, they knew that there was a chance that Dre Greenlaw might not ever be Dre Greenlaw again, and they weren't going to have him for a majority of this year. The fact that we're now entering potentially the second offseason of knowing this and not bringing him back, and we're like, God, geez, I don't know. I mean, how are we going to, what are they going to do? Oh, no, not the Eagles. They already have plans. They had plans 2 years ago for these moves. Oh, they're all five of the main pass rushers they had from the Super Bowl that got 70 sacks. Oh, all of them are going to be gone in 2 years. And they're going to be better. They're going to be better in 2 years than what they were with 70 sacks. By the time they reach the Super Bowl, that 70 sack pass rush unit is not going to be as good as the unit that they put together that peaks at the right time 2 years later. And they're all new. Every single one of them. So when we say the Eagles are going to lose those three players, it's like, well, yeah, but I mean, they potentially already have their replacements ready on deck. And they're going to get a whole nother draft cycle. I'm pretty sure that Eagles fans trust that they are going to make the necessary moves to make up if they lost all three of them. They're not sweating losing those three players. If we were losing those three players, we would freak out. Freak out. So yeah, they've got to be less sentimental, and they've got to be better at replacing these guys. And looking ahead 2 years and knowing this guy's a free agent in 2 years, and we probably aren't going to have the money to re-sign him, so we might want to find his replacement now. You got to always be ahead of these things, and the Eagles seem to be. They're going to be tough to catch in one offseason. Dave Barclay says, see, D-Hop was talking about sketchy ref calls. Yeah, I did. I definitely saw that. I think his point was like, you guys seem to talk when it goes against us, but when it goes for us, but when it's against us, nobody has anything to say, which I think is a fair point. That is also not at all why they lost that game. So just to be clear, and I like D-Hop, but that was like one of the things that if the Chiefs had won that I would have felt pretty good about was like, well, at least D-Hop got his ring, I guess. Steve-O's clearly late. Hey, Steve-O, he's not making that kind of money yet. Hey, Steve-O, multiple times on this same channel, I've said, hey, when the 49ers give big money to Brock Purdy, they're going to have a couple year window where they can still win because he's going to be inexpensive. That's Jalen Hurts right now. The window is wide open because he's not expensive. So it's not just day one you sign them and you're screwed. That's not how the salary cap works. A for effort, though. Definitely A for effort. Bring back Trey. No, I don't think that's the move for sure. Yeah, I mean, seemingly. Seemingly, they do. They definitely have to beef up that line. It's crazy though because they're actually going to lose. Well, potentially, uh, one of one of their best offensive linemen is a free agent. So they had the interior of that offensive line was in really good shape, and they might lose one of those guys. So not only do they have to make the offensive line better, but they also have to potentially replace one of their really good players on the fly. So Chiefs, listen, the Chiefs are going to be competitive. They're going to be competitive, but it's going to be harder. And now that teams have kind of figured out how this works, it's like okay, yeah. Listen, I mean, I did say that I prefer Brock Purdy, but if you go back into the video when I was breaking it down, I mean, other than where's the proof of that? Like we're standing on preference of how a guy plays, but there is no statistic or accomplishment that backs this up. This is just personal preference at this point. Personal preference. Dave Barclay says, I rooted for Saquon. He earned the ring and deserves it. Yeah, for sure. He definitely did. He definitely did. That seems like backwards thinking. Just pay them and then they'll for sure win. That's weird. Clarzard, how can we beat Philly in the playoffs? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, here's the thing is that it does seem like a daunting task now, and it is going to be hard to do. Like, I don't see a scenario where the 49ers and the Eagles go into the season and anybody looks at those rosters on paper and says the 49ers are better. I don't see that scenario. However, the Eagles have a very tough schedule next year. Is there a scenario where the 49ers could get a higher seed and have a home game against Philly? And then throughout the course of the season, attrition takes its course and it favors the 49ers? Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a lot of football that has to happen before we even have to worry about that. But on paper, I don't think that you're going to feel good about the 49ers versus the Eagles strictly on paper. I don't think that that's going to go anywhere. Jesse, everyone thought Tampa was unbeatable after their 2020 Super Bowl win in 2021. They lost in round 2. The Eagles are great and are better than San Francisco, but it's not impossible that San Francisco could upset them next year. No, we just talked about that. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and also it's not impossible that another team does really good. Like the Commanders have a ton of money to spend. They could be pretty good. And there's always one random team that comes out of nowhere. Maybe I could see that potentially being the Bears. They've put together an all-star coaching staff there. Who knows? The Lions, I think a lot of people are writing them off as if they're just not going to be good. I don't know that to be true. But anything can happen. There's a lot. But all we can look at is what do these rosters look like on paper. There is no scenario, barring major injuries, that one offseason is going to be enough for the 49ers roster on paper to close the gap with the Philadelphia Eagles. It's just not. But that doesn't mean that they can't beat them or upset them. So Washington is coming, yeah. Odds makers, though, have the 49ers with a better chance, which is interesting. Better than the Rams, too. Also interesting. Technically, the 49ers drafted another offensive lineman last season, but he didn't make it past the preseason. Yeah, technically they did. It was always the wrong one, though. I mean, when they drafted Kingston, I was so mad. So mad. Because 2 picks later, it was like 2 or 3 picks later, and now I'm drawing a blank on his name, but the center for the Rams, who ended up having to start because of injury, was right there. and he was clearly the better player. I think his name starts with a B. I'm drawing a blank though. Anyways, he was Bo Limmer. There you go. It did start with a B. Yeah, Bo Limmer was right there. Right there. And he was a way better player than Kingston. Way better prospect. I don't know how he slipped as far as he did. And the fact that the Niners didn't take him was so frustrating. So frustrating. That was crazy. Spider G says seeing Hurts win the Super Bowl in a second try makes the 2013 NFC Championship loss hurt more. I think Cap would have done the same and gotten redemption in the Super Bowl and beat the Broncos if we beat Seattle. I know, man. I agree with you. That Broncos team was not up to snuff. That was the Super Bowl, and we all knew it. And Bowman going down was just, man. I remember that game. In fact, I had a memory pop up not too long ago, like a Facebook memory of me holding my son the day of that game. And we were both in 49ers jerseys. My son was 1 at the point. I think 1. I think he was 1. A little over 1. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, either way. He was very young. Very young. And there's a picture of us both holding both wearing 49ers jerseys. I was much younger then. And it sucked. It sucked. I know you remember. You remember I was so pissed. I was so mad they didn't draft Bo Limmer, man. Gosh. I think that's what's funny though, Emiliano is, and all fans can say this. I love when this comment happens. You have an opinion about the team, and then some jackass is like, "Oh well, what if you could do it better? Then why don't you run the 49ers?" Okay, first of all, I'm not getting paid to run the 49ers. It's not my job. That's number one. And number two, they are better at this. This is what they are paid to do. Nobody is saying that when you have an opinion that you're better than them. But also, what is also true is they are far from perfect. And there are a lot of times that a fan can have an opinion that it differs from the team that ends up being the right opinion. It ends up being right. And that not just me, I'm just saying anybody. So when people are stupid and say, "Oh, you just run the team if you're so smart," it's like, hey, jackass. Sometimes other people's opinions that are not in the building actually are better than the opinions that are happening in the building. It happens all the time for every team. So it's always a weird comment for me. Always a weird comment. And I actually would not venture to guess. I bet you if we go back through the draft coverage the last couple years when we've been upset about picks and liked picks, that we were actually right more often than not on how those picks turned out. David is very smart when it comes to the draft. Marco is very smart when it comes to the draft. Much smarter than myself when it comes to prospects. It's all year round for them. They geek out on this stuff. But by then I have my opinions too. And as a consensus, the opinion of the show on draft night about a player usually ends up being right. So there is that. We definitely do be hitting when it comes to the draft. Hey, brother Bob, what's up, man? Right on time for me to end it. Round 244, Wyatt Millum. Yeah, I've heard a lot of his name for sure. A lot of his name. Jesse, do you think Purdy will ever win a Super Bowl? This includes as a backup or him being a starter with another team. I'm going to say no, and he only makes one more NFC championship with the 49ers. that's tough because I don't know where he's going to end up and how. I mean, see how many ex 49ers won the Super Bowl technically last night? I mean, Danny Gray and Ty Davis Price, speaking of bad draft picks, they won a Super Bowl last night. So who knows? I'm not going to guess that. I will say this, as far as him winning it as a starter with the 49ers, my belief is no. And that's not a new belief, by the way. I did a show with Larry during last season, and I remember he asked Vish and myself, how many rings will Brock Purdy win? And my response was, does he win a Super Bowl this year? And what I meant by that was, if he doesn't win a Super Bowl this year, which was not this last season, but the season before, that I don't believe that he'll win a Super Bowl as a starter for the 49ers. And we'll see. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that it plays out that he does, or that they realize it and they move on quickly and can win a Super Bowl in another fashion. But I believe that that year was going to be his best chance to do so. And it didn't happen, unfortunately. They were this close. But the good news is that Jalen Hurts proved that the whole, everything is impossible until it's not. And the whole, hey, if you've been to a Super Bowl and lost, you don't go back and win. Well, Jalen Hurts rewrote that narrative. So that narrative can't be used against Brock as a reason either. So he definitely can win one for sure. Do I think he will as a starter for the 49ers? No, I don't. And I didn't think he would after the one chance that they got 2 years ago. And that was something I said mid-season that year. So we'll see. We'll see. Yeah. Yep. Aminu has one. Latu. Burks, Gray, TDP. That's crazy. Anyways, y'all, much appreciated. Much love. Brother Bob coming in saying Sirianni and Kyle Levy facts. Good seeing y'all. I talked about it early on. You can definitely go in and see that, Brother Bob, if you weren't there in the beginning for the live. I appreciate you. Much love, everybody. Hope you have a blessed night. We'll talk soon. Actually, did I miss any? I did. Oh my God, thank you. Dave Barclay says, I rooted for Saquon. Yep, got that one. Daza says, Hurts is a fumble away from 2 rings and 2 Super Bowl MVPs. True. He still played really good in that first game. Smack Jones says, off subject, your opinion on the halftime show. Oh, interesting. I liked it. Here's the thing. I'm not a big Kendrick Lamar guy. I never have been. His voice kind of irritates me a little bit, but I think Kendrick Lamar is much more than just a rapper or a lyricist or an artist. When it comes to a musical sense, like, he's just an artist, and he says a lot without saying anything. He says a lot through symbolism, and the way that whole halftime was put together, like, everything was well planned out and by his doing. So Kendrick's a deep thinker, a really deep thinker. So I like the halftime show. It was, but then it's like the music side of things. I'm not a big Kendrick fan, so I was kind of in the middle. It was okay. I like the messaging. I like where he was going with that. I like that he thought outside the box. Not a big fan of his music, so that's kind of where I'm in on it. But he definitely gets people thinking for sure. And I did think it was also funny the way that he played Drake the whole thing. He just kept teasing it and teasing it and teasing it. That was pretty funny. And then I got Brother Bob. Okay, all right, y'all. Oh, geez, is this another one? Adam says, guess the Kyle fan club didn't see the plot twist coming. Nick got his ring first. Yeah. Again, much like I have my preference of Purdy over Hurts, you can have your preference of Kyle over Sirianni. And I probably do as well. I'm not a big Sirianni guy. But there is nothing to back that up that is credible other than I just prefer this guy over this guy. But to say that Brock Purdy is better than Hurts or Kyle is better than Sirianni, that is purely a preference. There is no stat or anything that backs that up. There just isn't. So it comes down to what you prefer. I personally prefer what the 49ers have, but that's a preference and nothing more. So, anyways, much love. I'm going to get out of here before you guys say anything more. Appreciate you. Talk soon. Peace.